Everybody, kia ora koutou nā tanga rangatira, mihi atu ki te kaupapa o te rā, nō reira tēnā rā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this OPIC meeting on the 22nd of June. Blimey, it's June already. I don't have any apologies, although we're just trying to get hold of Bruce because I understood that he was coming via Zoom rather than person, and we seem to have lost him, so we'll keep an eye open for Bruce. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Nope. Number 4, public forum petitions and deputations have not been notified. Confirmation of minutes of the 31st of May, please. Somebody like to move those? Thank you, Councillor McPhail, seconded by Chairman Horrell. Any changes or questions? Thank you, I'll put those. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried, thank you. Had no notification of extraordinary or urgent business, nor any questions. Number 7, so we are on to item 8, which is Chairman and Councillors' report. Any councillors got any verbal reports to make? Thank you, neither have I. So, takes us very rapidly on to item 9, which is the General Manager's corporate report. But before we do that, I'd like to ask councillors to approve a slight change in the agenda. Would like to cover the public excluded items first, and then move into the public session after that. Reasons being we need to have that discussion. The flow of information works better if we do it that way. So I would like to move that we, thank you, Councillor McCallum, seconded Councillor McPhail, that we just rearrange the order and cover the public excluded items first. So that would take us, I'm not saying we've approved it yet, that will take us to items 11 straight away. Okay, so the motion that we change the agenda order. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried, thank you. And then we would need to move into public excluded, please, Mel.
The reasons for moving is to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations, to prevent the disclosure of use of official information for improper gain or advantage.
Thanks. Somebody like to move that, please? Thank you, Councillor McPhail. Seconded, Chairman Horrell. All those.
Live streaming? Or?
Go back to live streaming, please, David, and assemble the stuff that we have for the beginning. Back on live streaming. Right. Oh, yes, it does too, yes. Great, welcome back everybody to the public session. Just give me 2 seconds to find the right part of the agenda. There we go. Oops. Right, so we are back to item 9.1, the draft annual plan. And we have Rachel and Tania to take us through this. Thanks, team.
Yes, so this item builds on our previous council workshops and the council meeting back in April, and is essentially bringing the draft annual plan to this committee for your recommendation and endorsement for the council meeting next week. So you will recall the most significant aspect of the discussions to date is holding with the current long-term plan, and in particular the average 5% rates increase. Some of the factors you've been considering as we have progressed through the process are the increased living costs that our communities and ratepayers are facing, the desire to provide that certainty about rates, costs going forward, the anticipated surplus for the current financial year, which we discussed at the last OPAC meeting, and how we cover any additional costs, including contingency costs for the climate resilience projects and doing that by debt. So the main thing with our annual plan is obviously to signal the differences from the main thing with an annual plan is to signal the differences from the long-term plan. And we've got a table within the document that Tanya is going to take us through now, which shows those differences. So that's page 8 of your draft annual plan.
Thank you, Rachel, Chair.
Thanks, Tony.
So we have notes 1 to 7, and you may have well read them, but the bottom line, I think, is, as Rachel said, is there's 3 differences in here. In the revenue, but particularly in the cost section, we're dealing with inflation that is now twice what we budgeted for in the LTP, and we were encouraged to budget for, as all councils were. That seems like a long time ago now. We had inflation predicted at 3.3%. So it's made quite a difference to our numbers here in our operational costs and our staff costs. And that, Chair, is the main difference in our expenses. There is some degree, there's a small amount of increase in staff costs, when I say small relative to the total cost. And we have increased our income, though, to offset that. So we're expecting that the staff investment there will be largely cost recovered. So we have $861,000 of other income budgeted. We have $135,000 of dividends from Southport expected above the LTP. We have $2.5 million of grants there that are greater than the LTP, and that is a reflection of work programmed for last year, what the year we're just completing, which will be taken into next year as a result of us not being able to complete that work. So that's money from the government for those climate resilience projects. And as we say here, we've got an increased cost in staff and an increase in other expenses. And our surplus will end up $918,000 higher than the LTP. The operating deficit, though, if we subtract the capital grants, will be lower. And we're planning to have a greater deficit as a result of those increased costs. As Rachel said, we are holding those costs, not putting the rates up. The capital expenditure, note 6, it's forecast to be $7.3 million higher than the LTP. That is expenditure of $4.2 million, again being carried forward from this current year, with a contingency of $3 million. Across the total climate resilience project of $18.5 million, that $3 million is 16%. And that we believe is a prudent amount to include in the annual plan, as significant, large amount of that work is yet to be tendered or completed. The debt, item 7, will be very close to the LTP total debt. That is even considering the contingency, and the reason for that is simply the surplus that we carried forward from this year. We note there that if the contingency fund needs to be used in the annual plan year, then the debt will increase the following year above the LTP. Before I go to any other page, Chair, can I take questions on that?
Please, any questions? Councillor McCallum?
Yes.
And Bruce.
I know we're better off this year for a whole lot of reasons. Are we able to carry that through because our base is higher? In other words, I'm expecting that either we'll redo some of our work programs for a whole lot of reasons. We're thinking about how we do our work. It seems to me there is a potential that our effective debt use will be less because the world's changing, and what we thought was important yesterday may not be as important going forward. So I'm actually probably thinking we're going in a better position as we go through this than what we forecast for even 12 months ago, which was higher debt earlier. In other words, I'm thinking our break-even point is probably going to be about the same, but our actual debt loading will be less through that hockey stick effect. Or am I assuming too much?
There's many parts to that, councillor. Within these expenses here, we did say that we have a placeholder for inflation. We can't predict the amount of inflation between now and July 2023. So we've put that amount in there. We are doing a lot of work, as you're aware, internally on our processes, our programs and our prioritisation. If we could achieve those at a lower cost, obviously we will endeavour to do that. And if we can hold the budget against that inflation, we will endeavour to do that. In terms of the climate resilience spend, that is dependent on the work that Paul's team are doing on the ability to get those people on the ground. The forecast debt, all I can say to you is that the forecast debt is what it is here. And if it turns out to be less, well, that's good. But we need to have that sort of framework or that total funding available.
Chairman Horrell?
I'm assuming that we are putting this year's surplus into this year, which didn't used to happen because it used to take us 12 months and so it was a year out. So I'm assuming that's what's happening now, so it's actually well done for being predict months ahead of what we would have done several years ago. Probably would have been September before we knew what that year was, so it would have been the following year. So pick that up right, have I?
Yes.
Sorry, Bruce, I leapt ahead of you. Next.
No problem at all. Look, just one really minor, I assume there'll be a bit of an edit through this, but we are missing the number 4. I think I suddenly realised the number 4 answer is there, but we're missing the cross-reference around employee expense. We note it 4, but there's no 4 in the notes below. There is actually the wording, but there's no direct number. At least not in the copy that was circulated to me as part of the minutes. Look, Tanya, I am interested in your point, and I think you're quite right that we've got a surplus, but actually our operating deficit is real, and I think you're saying it's around about $3 million, correct? I mean, essentially, if you were to extract out the capital grants, which are for our capital work, obviously, we would be in an operating deficit position. Now, that broadly was consistent with the financial strategy that we have. Is this number, this annual plan, still consistent with our financial strategy and the gradual recovery of our operating deficit position?
Yes and no. The strategy is the same, but it's shifted down, Bruce. It is higher than our ADP, and it may well take longer to come out, and we will be reassessing it in year 3. So we've projected this year and the following year, and for these 2 years, we're okay in that we are banking the surplus and intending to move back towards zero, as you say. We've weighed up many risks, and we have potential of increased revenue and the potential of increased costs. Our advice is that we take the middle ground, which we believe is prudent, and keep the rate at 5% for this financial year, and assess that going into year 3. We're yet to see where our marine income lands. We're yet to see where inflation lands. Inflation next year is predicted, depending who you listen to be back down to 3%. So it's very difficult to know. But I would say to you that our ultimate goal is to exactly be back to where we want to be. It may be delayed, though.
Well, thank you for that. I just wanted to recognise that, and I guess we'll come back to this, is this a prudent plan, is recognising that deficit exists at the moment. But the critical thing is, are we still setting a annual plan that will help us towards that rebalancing that we've known for the last 2 to 3 years we've got to go through. So thanks for that, appreciate it.
Thanks, Bruce. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor McPhail?
Just a quick one, just on regards to surplus, that we clearly saying that we haven't done all the work, we've rated all, just in regards to the perception that we've got surplus. That, have we actually done the work, we've rated for that, and then we look like we're pushing it ahead and keeping our rates down, but are we actually going to do that work? And making sure we tell the public that we've actually got the ability to do that work in the next year, even though we couldn't do it in the first year. So, yeah. Is that what we're doing technically, or?
Yes. The surplus, if you divide it as the total of our expenditure, isn't perhaps as large as you might think, because we're turning over 40 million. We have the largest part of our surplus to date in two areas, as we keep saying in OPEC, is in our staff vacancies. I like to say the word turnover, but it's not. Turnover is what everybody's experiencing, but it's in that average vacancy rate, which is still now within industry levels, but higher than we've had before. And then in that, particularly in that area of transformation, where we had large pieces of work that took some time to, first of all, get the staff to run that program, and secondly, to scope up that. So it's not, I'd say, Council, it's not across the board that it's been underspent. And I think that's the key thing. It's in key, in staff numbers, yes, but in general projects, many of them are where they would be in the past. But it is particularly in that one area, in the IT digital area. And we are intending to keep doing that work, albeit later.
Yeah, no, it's as long as it explain, because in regards to the rate take, it's actually close to 10%, well, it's 20 million or 20 something million rate take. So have we rated too much? The questions will be asked, rated too much hanging on, then you're going to flatten it out the next year.
I appreciate they will ask.
We can,
I appreciate people will ask the questions, but with all the best intentions and assuming we're operating in a normal environment, we set that rate with that understanding. As we set this rate, with the expectation that we're going to have a normal environment.
Normal and very inverted commas. Great. Did you have anything else, Councillor McCallum? Are you
I think
kind of looking like you
it's
might
a
want
good
to say
reminder that, and I might have this wrong, but my understanding is about half our income is rate generated, and the other half is what we invoice, and out of that half that we take as rates, half of that is actually catchment work. So really the rated income is only really about very rough term, about 25% of our total income. So there's actually, it's a smaller part of our bigger budget than what people realise. It's not the budget. And we probably need to remind them at times that some of the stuff is how that breakdown actually works, because that's quite important when we're having these conversations.
Thanks. Councillor Cook?
Reading the recommendation, paragraph 2 of the recommendation to me is the important thing, that we've prepared the budget based on reasonable judgment and assumptions. Considering the financial results and what we've heard today, gives me confidence that we have done that. We'll get it as correct as possible to be, knowing what we know.
Yeah. In that case, would you like to move the recommendations, Councillor Cook?
Well, yes, I'm happy to move all 3 recommendations.
Or do you have something else to say?
Well, my understanding, we're only part way through this, and I thought there was more to come, because I'd like to talk about the prefix at the beginning.
Oh, okay, that's what I was.
And I think there's other parts
sorry.
of the budget.
Sorry, yes.
Yes,
I got excited.
We're presenting this to the community, but it's actually good for us to actually understand the whole document.
Yep, sorry, my mistake.
That was my understanding.
It was nearly a really quick conversation.
Good try.
Carry on, Tanya. Thank you.
A little bit excited, Chair. Page 8 and 9, were there any further questions on those commentary? happy for anybody to point out commas, full stops and such. We have tried.
There is a macron or whatever they're called missing from one of the Māori words early on, but I'll come back to you if that.
Thank you. Page 10 and 11 are prudential disclosures.
Can I ask a question, Tanya, please? We're doing capital work and we have depreciation, but we've got nil against our essential services benchmark.
For the coming year.
Is that right?
When all of the work we're doing in the coming year, Bruce, is in capital work in progress. So we're not expecting any of that completed work in the 22-23 year. Is that the right answer? Am I answering right?
What you're saying is it's not finished, so it hasn't been capitalised. Therefore, you don't recognise it as capital expenditure. I actually would wonder, because we are showing capital spend through our cash flow statements and our FIS, and I wouldn't have made that distinction around work in progress, but then I've never probably directly had to prepare these. I've only made comments. So you'll have a stronger sense of whether work in progress is actually deleted. I think if that is the case, and that's technically correct, we should just note that.
Perhaps I could expand a bit further. Of our capital works, the only project that will have depreciation will be the Stead Street pump station. All the other works are earthen banks, which we don't actually, our current policy is not to depreciate any flood banks. So unlike many TAs who have substantial depreciation and therefore cash flow from that, we will only be depreciating the Stead Street building and pump, and it's not, in this plan, it's programmed to be completed at the end of the financial year.
So the $779,000 in the P&L is related to probably vehicles and others?
In total, and the existing, this building.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor McCallum?
Could I just go back to page 9? The second paragraph there.
Network services, of course.
A number of these additional costs are offset by savings in contractor budgets. What do you mean by that? And then the next line, it says basic cost recovery from compliance and procurement. Now, my understanding is compliance, we struggle to actually retrieve the work there because it's not as clear as the consent side of it. It's actually quite difficult. And procurement is what we buy, so we can shop around a bit more. But I'm just not sure whether we're actually making statements there, and I'm going, what does that actually mean?
We can work on clarifying, but I can answer the question. So, we did advise council that we're adding some staff and key roles. One of those areas which is very key to us is compliance. So there are 3 new staff to be recruited. Consent monitoring, which we now call resource management monitoring, and 1 has been seconded into the project for the New Zealand aluminium smelters area. There's an assumption that those 3 particularly will be cost recovered in terms of that their rate will be able to be charged to the consent holder sufficiently to cover their cost. So we can look to clarify that, but that's the intention of that statement.
I understand that, but what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, I'm just not too sure if it looks like you're actually squeezing the contractors' budgets.
So there's further on then, we are looking to place, there are other staff, there's not too many others, but there's a couple of other staff members we're intending to add, and we are going to take the money from the contractors' budget. So
I just wondered whether are we better to say that we are actually bringing some of our costs internal, so we're actually transferring from a contractor budget to permanent staff,
Yeah,
I-
so can I just clarify, it's a wording
Yes,
explanation
yes,
rather than the concept itself that you,
yes.
yeah.
So,
We can have a look at that later. It's bringing two concepts together that perhaps would be better
Yeah.
split out, so.
yeah, so that, and then we're effectively going to cost recover where we can. But I was thinking we need to look wider than just those two areas. So you could put consents in there, or you could put other chargeable work in there as well, because I'm not sure whether we actually gain a lot through there. Like to me, it would be rats and mice, it's not significant.
You'll be pleased to know, councillor, though, that in the last 12 months, our compliance and consents budgets have been closer to budget than ever.
Yeah, but compliance itself, because I know consents is pretty much ahead, because the way we've actually changed the funding mechanism there, that's actually ahead.
Combined, they are on budget. Yeah. The emphasis here is, though, is on the recovery of those additional staff. That's the intention. We can, as Rachel said, split the explanation and try and clarify.
That would be helpful.
Yep.
I've personally used the words internal resilience because we've found during this last crazy 24 months that our ability to rely on all our previous, even our closely held contractors has been really stretched. As they are both unavailable physically, some of them, and others have been snaffled by other councils. And it's actually, it's to our benefit, I think, to think about that a little bit differently.
I agree.
Yeah. So Tanya, we were up to pages 10 and 11 with you. This time not cutting you off. Carry on.
Page 13, the financial statements. Comprehensive revenue and expenses, standard format, surplus of 3.788 million. I'll just turn the pages, is there anything on that page, Chair?
No.
Statement of financial position, or what we used to call balance sheet, page 14.
Sorry, Tanya, I was just trying to, could I just ask a question about the P&L, please?
Yes.
On page, so we're up to page, you've just gone through the P&L, haven't you?
I referred to that and asked for questions, yes.
Yes. Can I just check? The operating surplus clearly won't have any capital gains in our portfolio investment, right?
No.
It would normally come up under other comprehensive revenue and expenditure.
In our statements, it normally comes in under other gains or losses. And
Before the operating surplus.
But in this page, it's at the top of the page. It would normally come into operating surplus. It's traditional, but they're in.
I'm just wondering if technically, look, it's a technical question whether we're being, for purposes of rating, this is right, but for purposes of saying this is comprehensive revenue and expenditure, it's not. Is it?
We've all the way through, the numbers are zero, Bruce, both in the LTP, the annual plan, and the previous year.
Okay, we've got audit sign off. That's fine. I won't prolong it. That's fine.
Our auditors seem happy with that, and it's part of the model. So
The auditors got easier, Tanya. Don't worry.
I'm not disagreeing with you. On our other statements, we prefer to have it underneath. The balance sheet, is there anything of note there? Any questions on our prospective balance sheet? No significant changes. Statement of cash flows, page 15. The line here that perhaps Bruce was referring to, net cash flow, indirectly referring to the net cash flow from operating activities And the financial year we're in is negative 3 million, 3.2. In the annual plan, it's negative 2.5 projected. The LTP had us projected at negative just under $1 million. So that's where our extra $1.5 million difference has come in and additional expenses.
Councillor McPhail?
Sorry, I'm catching up with you. Just a quick question, that not back in page 14. Lease area up $1 million, 1.1 million. What's that we're not using the reserves?
Yes,
From the LT.
yes.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Just on that one, I'm trying to reconcile the differences there with the lease balance. Because here it looks like it's about $1 million, but when you look at the lease balance change, it's a bit under $500,000. Am I just not reading that right? The LTP, over 6 mil, annual plan 7.2, LTP for that same year it was 6.2. So it almost looks like it's $1 million net surplus.
Yeah, that's what I just asked.
When I look at the balance in the lease, it gets to the same. It gets to the same figure. It doesn't start at the same figure. So, I mean, it's so in the lease thing, it's goes at 6752, going up by 493, and getting to that same 2 figure. But yeah, I'm just
Starting at a different balance share. So this is the difficulty with forecasting the opening. What we have to do this new annual plan year is we forecast what the balance will be next week on the 30th of June, our opening balance for the following year. And that opening balance we're saying is $500,000 different to this financial year, and that's because we're not taking any of that funding out. We projected to take out $400,000 every year at least in the LTP to pay for the climate resilience project. We have agreed that we're not funding that yet until we've had those discussions, and so we're simply saying we haven't needed to take it this year. We won't need to take it next year. Therefore, the total difference will be $1 million. The $1 million will still be in the leasehold property and leasehold reserves. I think we said in one of the workshops back in February that we would fund this through debt, interest only, until we've had those discussions about how we're going to fund it.
so the compensation before earlier on is basically saying there's nothing to stop us during the year actually making some decisions that actually change it. We're putting it back, basically we're putting the budget out.
Oh, absolutely.
Thanks, Tony, that's a good explanation actually. Alright, moving on.
Net cash flow from operating we've covered. Then there's the capital expenditure, which includes climate resilience projects. There's a placeholder there for work on the building and normal replacement of vehicles and sundry plant. And then the grant from the government for climate resilience, and a drawdown of 5.2 million will be required to balance this. It all goes to plan. We'll end up the year with $374,000 overdraft and a debt. Page 16. The first part of this note 1 is our total rates for the year versus the LTP. The change in the percentage changes between the LTP and the annual plan. If you take the annual plan and compare it to the left-hand side, which is this financial year, you see the total will equal 5%. The land sus rate actually has not increased, so we're holding that at 0. We have the new rabbit control rate. Biosecurity rate has gone up slightly more than the catchment. Which you're familiar, we went round and spoke to the catchment groups, and their rate has gone up 1.3% above the LTP, so it's sitting around just under 5%. Note number 2 is simply a disclosure of exchange and non-exchange transactions. Those are interested in for our auditors.
She's smiling at you, Bruce.
Waiting for Mr. Robertson to answer. Any questions, Chair? No. Page 3 is our prospective reserve movement, and this is where the opening balance is actually the forecast balance. So it's updated to where we think it will be on the 30th of June. And then forecast from that to the end of the financial year. We have a number of pages of accounting policies that are of interest mainly to accountants. We can go to page 28. Councillor Cullen will probably answer the question.
Just keep going, Tony.
Still trying to find page 28.
Comes after 27.
I know that, I'm at 26.
Quite good if you have the paper, it's easy.
Yeah, much easier.
I know, but I've got notes on my computer.
Okay. Page 28 is our funding impact statement for the whole of council. This tells us sort of like a combined revenue statement, cash flow statement together. Partway down the page it said surplus deficit operating funding, and it's got minus 2.6 million. So very similar to the cash flow to that point, they just have different formats. And again, then it lays out the capital expenditure and the debt. And it breaks the capital expenditure up into improved levels of service or replacement of existing assets, which is something the DIA introduced some years ago, where they hope to give some transparency to whether we're spending our money simply fixing things and replacing them or actually improving the levels to the ratepayers. And the bottom line should be 0 as it is. Page 29 is the reconciliation of that back to the profit and loss, so we can see how that works out. And then, Chair, page 30 is our rates information for setting the rates, actual levies. And we set, just reminding you that we set the rates resolution on the 30th of September normally. That's traditional for this council. Most councils actually set them next week on the adoption of the annual plan. That's something we could do in the future potentially, we're working towards. It has worked for us so far. So these are prospective rates. They change very, very little between now and their adoption, but as our database is updated, I can tell you that there's still a significant amount of activity in property transactions in Southland. Our sales and our subdivisions are record levels coming through our office, which is quite phenomenal in terms of the changes in properties.
But that aside, the amounts, doesn't matter who owns it, the amount, the rateable income will be the same, is that correct? Unless there's a subdivision.
There's a growth in value
Capital value will be changing.
as the properties are subdivided. So
Okay.
more subdivisions than we've had, and the discussion for another day is about how we rate for growth. We've never had a rate, we've never rated for growth. We've always assumed that our 5% increase is our 5%. Other councils will set a rate plus growth. So it's a discussion because I feel that our province is going to become a growth province. Certainly if it keeps up what it's doing. Rate samples, page 38. We have two pages of rate samples here that we've, same rate samples we've had for a number of years. Where we give an example for a ratepayer in Invercargill, Winton, Gore, Te Anau, and then some rural properties and how they may be affected with this 5% rate increase. As always, there's a variation between the actual rate and the 5% depending on what has happened to their particular property, their value, their land value, and their capital value. We don't rate separately for rural or urban. It's simply a matter of what is the value change in a particular property. So the values here range from 0% through to, I think, percentage-wise, yeah, percentage-wise, dollar-wise, from -$8 to $98 for commercial. Residential rates sitting around the 18 to 28. The Southern District higher here, note that they had a revaluation last year and they had substantial gains in land value here. In Winton, 65%. We have examples of land value doubling in the community in Lumsden. Some of our rural areas further out, the land values were very low. They've gone up at least, I won't say at least, they've gone up substantially. And we have the rates calculator, and that is the total document.
We've got Chairman Horrell, thank you.
Once again, it's the hardy annual work because of the fact that the one council is revalued every 3 years. So this year it is the SDC. The light caps people are going to be a bit grubby, even though it's only $50. Then it's 5%. That was dizzy too. But it's very much capital values has increased substantially. So you've got some of it no increases, the odd negative. Obviously, lifestyle blocks are dropping. They're down 1.5%. So, but as we say, that's an average. But that's where we get the phone calls. So you said 5%. Why isn't it? And that's just the answer. Is actually where you might be able to get the capital value, but it's actually not.
Makes me happy from the Gore district by the looks of it.
Yeah, see, he's happy this year. Yeah.
See what we can do about that, Councillor McLeod.
Good linking there.
Chair,
Stop it.
Chair, if it's any help, I was reading the 2006 LTP yesterday, looking for something, and I note in their section on rates, they had a very long disclaimer about the movement in value between the three councils as they were, and the effect of changes in capital value in that particular year were quite substantial.
Right.
So it is actually not a new thing, sadly.
Years before, and why can't we do it last 2 years and not have hiccups? For some reason, since the government tell it, no, you've got to do it this way.
I wonder if that will change with the new, and with new spatial plans and the like. I wonder if some of that will change actually going forward. We might need to think about how that's going to make a difference.
It would be wonderful. I mean, 50,000 total ratepayers is a suburb of Christchurch, so.
Yeah, precisely. Councillor McCallum.
Yeah, well, there's two things really. I'm back into the opening message by the chairman and acting chief executive. I think we're probably at a stage now we can put the chief executive there and not the acting.
Indeed.
The other thing is I'm not sure whether we have showcased the work streams that we have undertaken or have planned for the coming year well enough. And I think we've got the ability, this is my personal, to actually showcase everything from the work in field and with Uderia, to some of the other activities that we're doing, biodiversity, through to reorganising some of the liaison committees into a different format going forward to meet the challenges of climate change and emissions. I think while it's embedded in the document, I think and I know there's a limited reading audience here, but we should be celebrating the successes of our investment and work program. And I'm just wondering, I haven't got the words, but I'm wondering whether we could put something in the front there that would actually pick up that sentiment a little bit better. It's my personal view. It depends on how you read it, but I think, to me, a person reads a little bit bland, but I think there's some stuff in there that we should be excited about, working with government on climate resilience projects for the betterment of community resilience. I think we could bring some of that stuff in that would actually help us for the rest of the document. Would actually makes more sense to me that this is why we've got these ups and downs and backs and forwards and numbers, and we're going into debt and forecasting other things because we've got this work program that we've talked to the community about and we want to work with them and communicate with them. my approach to it, and I'd be interested to see what other
Thanks.
people
Any
thought.
other councillors got thoughts there?
I agree with Councillor McCallum. Unusually for me. No, I think it makes a good point, but, the executive summary, we're trying to have a summary that people can read and get the full picture. But trying to keep it short enough so they will read all of it to the end.
Yeah, I understand.
So there's a balancing act.
Little words. Chairman Horan.
Yes, having listened to the conversations and then after that second paragraph, I'm wondering, I've written highlights, we've perhaps a little bit in there. And the next paragraph, we possibly aren't highlighting just the holding the rate is the important thing, despite inflationary pressures, well, I've got a little bit there. But also looking at the next couple of paragraphs, whether top priorities in their busy year, maybe the one below it needs to go up. So just, just have a chat to Adrian and Co about just making it flow a little bit better. It's what it says is fine, but actually if we're trying to communicate with the 7 people that read it apart from ourselves, do they get a good picture? So if we can make it a wee bit clearer, and I think the 5% we actually need to leverage that a bit, and it is despite inflationary pressures, and we talk about further down about how we're as an organisation we're trying to be innovative in the way we deal with these challenges. So if we can highlight some of the things that we're trying to do that are really hard, I think that's probably a good thing. They're not major changes, but I think we probably agree that we could just sharpen it a wee bit.
Any other thoughts before I share mine?
Agree.
The tone is really good. I really liked the overall tone, actually. And when I went through with my highlighter, there were 6 or 7 things that actually are covered off there, Councillor McCallum, that I think you're referring to. They're just not expanded. So yeah, we could maybe highlight some other things, but the people who read that bit and the people who look at page 27 are not the same people. So necessarily, so we may have covered off a couple of parts of the audience as well, actually.
I've listened to Bruce's comments too, but I was still thinking this is something that we put out as a combined team of staff and councillors, and it's one way we can showcase some of the things we've done. So I understand what you're saying, but I'd like to just give it a little more, instead of, because we know the language, we know what it's referring to, but some people don't. So when you look back at it, you go, oh, you've now got it very quickly. I've actually picked up the summary.
Yeah, true. Bruce, did you have any points on that introductory statement?
Oh, look, it's I was about to say it's a political decision, but I'm part of you guys. So look, I don't have any trouble, Lloyd. What I would just want to caution though, this is about prospective information, not what's happened in the past. But I would think a well-worded paragraph or 2 that says, we look forward to the future because we're building on a solid past of achievements in the last year, which isn't a bad thing. So you can get what I'm saying. You're not trying to write your forward for your annual report, which unfortunately won't be before the elections. But there's no reason that this shouldn't reinforce, an area that for all local authorities, the challenge is how we get our good news across as well. So, I'm agreeing with you, Lloyd, just be careful how you do it, because it's actually about what we're going to do. We can celebrate that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Right, given that, Councillor Cook, can I come back to you for my preemptive strike of moving the recommendations? Are you still willing to do that?
I moved all 3 recommendations. We've had a discussion, there was no seconder at that stage.
No.
Second.
Councillor McCallum and Chairman Horrell are fighting for the opportunity to second that. I'll put those recommendations then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody. It's a tick in the box. And a sigh of relief I saw from some people up the back, perhaps. Right, that takes us to the end of the agenda, actually, I think. Given that we've already done the public excluded, we've short-circuited ourselves, and that brings the meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and effort.